All right, we're going to get on with the afternoon. We're going to start with Brian Mavis from Mavis Consulting. He's going to be presenting on his ongoing research on solid tine aeration.
Can you hear me okay? Good? All right. Thanks, Doug. Thanks for the invitation here to share some information that I've been gathering for the past, I don't know, it's hard to believe, but this is my 17th year now. Started in 2000, started the company. Providing independent information and data for golf courses, athletic fields, sports turf mainly. And I apologize for some of these slides. I know we're right after lunch and there's a lot of numbers, so hopefully I'll keep your attention. I've threw some pictures in too, so we'll do my best to keep you awake. But yeah, really the data that I wanted to show you is, it's not so much a study, but it's more of a survey of samples that I've collected from golf courses throughout mainly Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. And the data that I'm going to show you is representative of samples that I've collected myself. So I can vouch for the accuracy. I've physically been to these sites, seen the samples, and I think there's some really good information here, and I know it's helped out a lot of golf courses that I work with already, and hopefully it'll help out some that I haven't been able to work with yet. So a few things I wanted to cover. The first is physical testing. What is physical testing? Just kind of briefly touch on that a little bit. All the data you're going to see is from Brookside Labs, which is a private lab in Ohio, just north of Dayton, south of Lima. They're a private lab that's been around since 1951, and they support a network of independent agronomists like myself throughout the world. So it's a well-known lab, and mainly what I want to go through is the difference that I'm getting in physical data, core aeration versus solid tine aeration, and specifically on putting greens. So, and I've got examples, several examples of solid tine only, core aeration only, and then I've got a couple of examples as well of a couple sites where they did deep tine only for a few years and dry ject only for a few years. So I want to touch on that a little bit too. So I guess to get into it here. So physical testing, what are we talking about? Sand, silt, clay, organic matter, your sand particle sizes, porosity, air-filled capillary, bulk density, particle density. This is what we're talking about when I'm sending a sample to the lab for physical testing. It's the same stuff if you were going to send a greens mix in, a bunker sand in. These are numbers that they're going to be looking for. So when I'm sending samples in to the lab, physical samples from greens, this is what we're talking about. So sample collection. One thing that I learned very early on was make sure you send representative samples into the labs. And in order to get enough sample to do the physical testing, since they're running the same test that you would run if you were sending them a greens mix, tea mix, whatever, they need half a gallon to a gallon of material. So in order to do that, I'm taking cup cutter samples and I'm dissecting them. So if we've got a top dressing layer that breaks out at 2 inches, I'm taking a minimum of 3 cup cutter plugs 2 inches deep. Say that's where your layer is, everything's consistent in that top 2 inches, that's what I'm taking. If it's 1 inch deep, then I'm sending them 6 cup cutter plugs. So you can see there's quite a bit of material per green to get these numbers. Another part of the physical testing is the infiltration readings. Labs can give you a number. It's difficult to repeat real world situations. So I like to do them on site, and I just use the double ring infiltrometers. You can buy these from Turf Tech. I'm sure there's several others out there. I feel like I get pretty good, accurate information with these instruments. So how good can these greens get physically? What are some of the best numbers? I know there's all kinds of numbers going around. Where should your organic matter number be? Where should your silt and clay numbers be? I'm not going to tell you where yours should be because every site's different. Some courses may perform better at 3% organic matter. Some may really be trying to get to 1.5% organic matter. So physically, how good can things get? Well, I took the average of what I consider the best maintained greens that I work with. And if you can see at the bottom here, there's 66 sand-based and 79 soil-based samples included in these averages. So these are what real world, where is kind of a benchmark. Okay, how do we compare cultural practice-wise, what we're doing with what the absolute best they can be maintained at. And so here's some of the numbers that I'm getting when I do those. Clay, basically the same. I mean, I broke it out sand-based versus soil-based, but if you look at clay, no big difference there. Silt, no big difference. Organic matter, basically the same, but they're right around 2% organic matter is my average for the best maintained greens. Now I've got a few that I work with that are 1.5%, 1.6% organic matter. That's pretty low. That's some very aggressive cultural practices. Typically that's 3 aerations a year and putting a lot of sand in that profile. But so these are some numbers. How good does it get? And if you guys have any questions, please interrupt me. Keep this pretty informal. If anything pops up, don't wait till the end. So now I break it out into the best core aerated greens versus the best solid tine aerated greens that I work with. So again, clay, basically the same. Silt is kind of the common difference that I see in solid tine versus coring. Silt, if you think about it, especially in a soil-based green, where you've got that silt in the root zone, and maybe you've already got an inch or two of sand build up, but if you pull a core and bring some of that up, you're never removing 100% of that. So some of that's going to get mixed in with your top dressing sand, and that's why I believe that silt number stays a little bit higher if you're coring. And then organic matter wise, yeah, it looks a little bit higher where there's solid tining at 2.4% versus coring at 2.1%. But again, remember, we're not comparing the same green side by side. This isn't a research plot. This is just the averages of what I'm seeing from everybody that I sample. And I'll show you some examples, the same green year after year, and how that organic matter is dropping incrementally. So another one, and on a soil-based system, solid tine versus coring. And again, these are representative of a lot of the best maintained greens that I work with. But clay, basically no difference. And again, there's that silt. It just kind of reiterates, okay, we're not bringing that up from beneath, and we're not mixing it with the top dressing sand. And if we just put straight top dressing sand on there, yeah, that solid tining seems to be doing a better job of keeping that silt down. And then organic matter wise, no big difference there, 2.3 versus 2.2. And then if we go to sand-based greens, a little more of the same, silt a little bit lower, but much closer because you don't have the silt from the soil base to be bringing up. And then organic matter, a little bit of difference there, but again, this isn't comparing one green, the same green, core aerated versus solid tine. It's just the average of all of them, solid tine versus cored. Okay, so here's the look that I get. Solid tine only, a little bit backwards, huh? And it was my same thought too. When I first started in 2000, an agronomist told me there's no difference core aeration versus solid tine, as long as you get sand in there. I didn't believe him at first, and probably like a lot of you, and I know there's some of you in the room that have implemented this program and probably didn't believe it in the beginning either, but that's why I wanted to gather all this data and put it together to really determine if this was possible. So I won't say whose boat that is. It's not mine. All right, so here into the numbers, and yeah, I'll spare you a little bit here. I'm not going to go through every one of those. I'm going to zoom in on just a few main components out of this that I want to just kind of help show you what's been going on. This is 12 years. I'll back up just a step. 12 years not pulling any cores on these greens. And this is L93, it's sand-based. L93 can produce a lot of organic matter. So to me, this is a pretty good test if this program is going to work or not. And unfortunately, I don't have the data from when we first started, and I finally convinced him to pull some samples in 2012 to see where we were. Organic matter 2.1 on 18 green, 2.5 on number 2 green, and this is the top 2 inches. And then again in 2016, 18's at 2%, 2 greens at 2.4. So there's 4 years. Those organic matter numbers are basically the same. Pretty good testament there. And you can see the silt and clay numbers definitely did not get worse by any means. So, and if you think back to as good as they can possibly get, what are those averages? The organic matter numbers, he's right in line with those. Those numbers, what he's maintaining without pulling a core for 12 years. And I'll get into kind of the equation that seems to work as far as aeration, tine sizes, frequency, all that in a few slides here as well. So there's the first example, and there's the profile pictures. I'd put those profiles up against about any I work with. Pretty healthy system. There's 2016. And the sand underneath, the reason we didn't like it, it was a little fine, a little uniform, a little unstable. So why bring that up when we core aerify and mix it with the top dressing sand that we're paying good money for and kind of delaying the benefits of adding that into the profile. So yeah, you can see in 2004, there was a little bit up there, but not a lot. And to me, that profile definitely has gotten better over the last 12 years. So another example on a soil-based green, a lot of numbers there, but I'll zoom in again. Number 15 green in 2009, that top 2 inches, 2013, 2015. Organic matter numbers started at 3.6, down to 2. That's a significant drop. Go ahead, Scott.
Hey, Brian, between the years here, 09 and 15, did this superintendent change any practices as far as how often solid time is sanded or not dressed, or is there anything there that changed?
No, when he started there, he kind of kept with those same practices of basically punching holes twice a year. The only addition may have been a little bit of dry eject. I can't remember exactly when he started that as well, but again, most of that goes below the top inch. So, but yeah, it's been a pretty darn consistent program. Yeah, and that's a soil-based system, and you can see what the silt has done: 5.6, 4.2, 1.7. If you were to pull a core, there's no way you drop that. I'm sorry, Jeff? Okay. Yeah, there's no way that drops that fast if you're pulling a core. And those greens, here's the profile picture. In 2007, not a lot of sand on there again, and that's some really high organic, high clay content soil beneath these greens. And then here it is in 2015. Never pulling that stuff up, always punching it down. Pretty good improvements. And again, not pulling a core, 9 years. So here's another example, soil-based green, 5 years only. And I guess one thing here that I kind of want to focus on as well, first year is 2007, organic was at 3.2. And the last 3 times it's been checked, he's staying right at 2%. That's right as good as it gets as far as keeping those numbers down. Silt numbers, that first year it looks like we got a little bit of soil. And then solid tining started after this sample here in 2010. So yeah, you can see those numbers drop down. Some nice improvements. So there's the profile picture. Again, I would put that up against any profile I work with. Very healthy. So, okay, all the solid tining data. Okay, here's one where these have been core aerated pretty much every year, twice a year. I mean, these are very well maintained greens. And one thing, organic matter, it's good, 3.1, 2.7 in 2014. pretty good number there. And I would actually say I would rather keep this course around 2.5 just because there's probably 99% POA. You get closer to 2% for POA and it's definitely more of a challenge just from moisture and nutrient retention. But you can see his silt numbers bounce around. And there's the profile. So again, doing things like we've all been taught, like the books say, core aerate, you'll get good results. I guess I want to pose the question to the group. Any guesses as to which one is core aerated versus solid tine? Colin, any thoughts? Right one cord? I'll wait till they pop up. This is the 5th time I've given this talk and nobody's gotten it right. So I thought odds were somebody was going to get it right. Sorry, Colin. Me too. So yeah, and one of the big indicators typically of coring versus solid tining, it's not, okay, you usually have that same sand layer sitting on top, but the big difference you see in the aeration holes, see how that one comes to a point? That's what I see 99% of the times if they solid tine and fill those holes with sand. It goes all the way down to the bottom. If you pull a core, rarely are they filled all the way. Unless you're using a 3/4 inch tine and maybe dried sand, or you have the perfect day where the weather's drying that sand, it's rare that they're filled to the full depth. So another one, anybody want to take a stab at this one? No volunteers? Yes? Thank you. Nice work, yep. And it's to that, again, that's about as small of a hole as you're going to fill with sand. That's extreme. It's not very often you get a hole that small. I think that was 3/8 inch filled. And here's your core aeration. And I know I was on site that day when I pulled this profile picture. They were pulling 3-inch cores and then cleaning it off. And he got 1.5 inches filled with sand. And that wasn't just one. I didn't just cherry pick one plug. That was repeatedly what I saw. And they were going to some pretty extensive efforts to fill holes with sand. So, and that goes into my next slide. Filling the holes with sand is the key to making it work. If you don't get the sand in there, solid tining only is not going to work for you. So how do you do that? And this has been by far the best way that I've seen to get this accomplished. Bury them with sand first, and then go over the top with a solid tine. And I know some of you in here that have done it. It's a learning process at first. Start on the practice green or a nursery, see how much sand it's actually going to take to fill those holes, and go from there, because each site's a little bit different. And I'll show you, there's an example there. And this is a situation where a course had put quite a bit of sand on. You can see that's 1/4 inch deep. This was before winter to help, hopefully to help protect the greens a little bit and prevent a little bit of ice damage. But again, first thing, as soon as the ground's thawed out and you can get an air fire on there, punch them. Your aeration's done in March. Holes are healed up. You don't have to punch them the rest of the spring. I mean, there's the process. Bury them with sand and then punch it in. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before, but you can figure on about 50% of the sand's getting worked in just with one pass of the aerator. And the nice thing too, these holes aren't getting collapsed and pinched. I'll play it one more time. With the top dresser going over top of them. So the sand's on there. And that's one of the keys too. Make sure you get enough sand, like I said before, to fill these holes the first time around. You don't want to drive over it. And then I'll show you what happens if you have to go back over it afterwards. I've never seen sand go in the cross tines. Bayonets maybe a little bit, but never on the cross tines. So, and I would say most everybody, if they start at 1/2 inch, they immediately jump to 5/8. And I would say a lot of them have jumped from 5/8 up to 3/4. You think that's a pretty good size hole, but you're probably thinking 3/4 inch hollow, which in reality outside diameter is closer to 1 inch. 3/4 solid really isn't that scary when you're filling them with sand like this. And so here's what happens if you don't fill them, or if you don't put enough sand on before you punch them, and that top dresser runs over these holes, pinches that together a little bit. So you did a great job filling all the way. I mean, there's 3.5 inches filled up. Wasn't enough sand, came in, topped them off a little bit more. You can see he's missing a good inch in that column there that could have been filled with sand. Versus over here, I mean, you can see how sharp the tines were or how dull they were. That's what I see across the board. Rarely do I see things that consistent, but with this practice, that's what's happening. So how much sand? And this kind of set my mind at ease when I saw this at one golf course. New green, seeded, that fall, 1/2 inch of dune sand blew on it. And this was in the spring. They came right up through it. So you think about putting sand on the green, you're going to kill it over winter. If seedlings can make it through a 1/2 inch, that 1/4 inch that you saw in the other picture isn't that scary. So you can put a bunch of sand on these greens and get them through. Okay, so sizing, spacings, all that good stuff. Roughly, from what I've seen, if you can get close to 20% of the surface area affected that's getting filled with sand, that's doing a great job of keeping you at those 2% organic matter numbers, 2% silt clay. That's kind of the equation that I've found that's a common thread from the best maintained greens that I work with. So roughly 20%. So tine sizes, like I said, if some start with a 1/2 inch, that doesn't last very long. It quickly goes to 5/8 and sometimes even 3/4. And your spacings, 1.5 by 2, 2 by 2 is the biggest spacing I would say that gets used. And then frequency, at least twice a year. If some courses do it once a year, it seems like those numbers don't get better, they don't get worse. It's just kind of like that's the amount to keep it kind of status quo. So that one time a year, that's my experience anyways. And one of the things that spurred some of the solid tine aeration only was the recession. No labor, no money, what can we do? And so a lot of clubs started solid tining. They didn't have time to pull cores or clean them up or mess with that. That started it a little bit, and I know it's kind of snowballed from there with a lot of other clubs. Like I said, the first club, it was because we didn't like the material underneath. We didn't want to mix it with our good sand. So as far as ways to incorporate the sand, a couple of the best ways I've seen are the sweep and fill or the TB220. I think that's what Toro calls it. There may be a few other models like that. They spin counter to the way you're driving. They're pushing a pile of sand around that's probably 2 inches deep. One, maybe 2 passes with that, and those holes are filled up. The other option and I like the green sweeps, just a little hood that goes on the blowers, very non-invasive, a little bit tedious because they're not very big, but do a great job of filling those holes. Or you can go with the traditional drag, Takes a little bit longer, still does a good job though. Okay, so the idea, I think Kurt Thummel was probably one of the more well-known ones in the state as far as not pulling cores on greens. I think that was 30 some years or so. I unfortunately never got the pleasure of seeing those or doing any testing on them. But I know here's a recent article in the USGA. They were saying that the idea is being used more and more. There was research out of Nebraska. I think Rock presented at MTF probably 4 or 5 years ago, solid tining versus coring. And again, not a lot of difference as long as you got those holes filled with sand. So the idea is definitely out there, and I guess I was skeptical of it to begin with, and I wanted to make sure, because your jobs are on the line, my job, my reputation's on the line. I want to make sure this works before I even think about recommending it. So here's the other common question I get. Okay, if we're just shoving material in, how can that be good for the system? And one way to measure that would be bulk density. So weight per volume. So say the brick and the sponge are the same size, which one's heavier? Yeah, obviously the brick. It's got more bulk density to it. So that is one of the readings that's on these tests. There it goes. Right over here to that back part of the data, and I'll blow that up as well. Bulk density numbers, this was 2012, sorry. Yeah, 2012 versus 2016. And again, 12 years without pulling a core, 154 versus 161. Little increase there. 1.5 versus 151 on that other green, the same. And the other thing too, I mean, I'm looking at the infiltration readings, I'm looking at the pore spaces. As long as these numbers keep progressing in the right direction, I know we're improving this system. So again, going to the 9 years, I think this one was a little more significant difference. Bulk density was 135. That's actually too low. That's pretty soft. There's too much organic matter, too much fluff in there. Not going to be a firm putting surface, not going to dry out real fast after a good rain. And it's actually getting right in line with 1.5, which is 1.5 to 1.6 seems to be a really good range for providing good playing conditions. Nice, firm putting surface. But you can see all the other numbers are heading in the right direction. Air-filled pore spaces from 2 to 10. Capillaries from 45 to 33. Great improvements there. So then going to the 5 years, again, more of the same. Here's bulk density at 1.5. Keeps jumping around 1.5, 1.53. That's not getting any more compacted. And the other thing too, when I'm on site taking these samples, I'm taking compaction readings. That's a standard. And because I want to make sure, because like I said, I was skeptical of this. I want to make sure we head anything off. If there's any concerns or issues, I want to make sure we know about it before we see it in the turf. So then we go to the core aeration. For 15, it's probably been more like 30 plus years. His bulk density, 1.5. Pretty similar to the solid tining numbers. Pretty darn consistent. So again, the argument, and I would agree with the argument too, if there were a lid on this bucket and we just somehow kept shoving more and more material into it, yeah, that bulk density is going up, the compaction's going up, but there's no lid on the greens. And that's kind of the one thing that's you got to think about. I mean, probably not so much this winter, but the freeze thaw, it's going to loosen things up as well, and yeah, make sure that the compaction isn't a problem. So this can't be right. 39 years to wait for that download. Can it really be that easy? I mean, I've had several superintendents tell me, no, that's too easy. It's got to be painful when we aerify. It's got to be long days, dark to dark. I had one superintendent, I was at a conference, and his wife was at the gathering, and she came up to me and said, "You're the guy who told my husband he didn't have to core aerify anymore?" I didn't think that it was that big of a deal, but she was pretty excited about it too, because he didn't complain so much when it came to that time of the year. So just, yeah, and I just wanted to show everybody the information. It's a matter of getting the sand in there. That's a huge part of the equation. And there's a lot of different methods for doing it. Deep tining, you can punch the sand. If I'm deep tining, boy, I would love to get sand channels down 10 inches and really make that fracturing kick, keep things loose for a long time. So I put the sand on first if I can stay ahead of them. And the same thing, here's the dry-ject. I've got a little bit of data on these two. Not as much experience with the Graydon. Didn't like the Graydon originally just because of the shiftiness, how kind of the mess you were left with when it was done. But now that they got the sand hopper on top, that's definitely helped alleviate some of that. And it seems to be more of a viable way, practice to use if you really want to get some sand in there and tear up that top. Floyd McKay, the drill and fill. Have any of you seen that done? Rich? Slow process? Painfully. Yeah, I've yet to see it. I've seen the machines, but I've never seen them in action. It's not something that's, I don't know, I haven't seen it used, Ohio, Indiana, or Michigan. Good way to get sand in there, but so here's a case where superintendent deep tined only. No conventional, no tight spacings, just deep tine only for 4 years. So we got numbers, the top 2 inches from 2012 to 2016. So in this case here, starts at 2.8 on organic matter. Good number, 99% POA greens. I'll take that. That's going to keep us pretty good and healthy. Then 2 years later, it jumps up to 3. 2.8 to 3, not a huge difference, maybe just a little bit of variability. But then the 4th year came and that trend continued. Jumped up to 3.2. So we got roughly a 0.5% increase in 4 years in that top 2 inches. So what's going on here? And just a complete misunderstanding. That superintendent took it as he didn't need to aerify anymore. So just deep tined only. Honest mistake. No problems with the turf. Turf didn't die. I mean, just we saw it in the physical data. Things weren't heading in the right direction, so we caught it, turned things around. That next time it was time to aerify, he worked a lot of sand in there. He got after it. But again, there's to show you the spacings, the tine sizes with deep tine only is not enough to control that organic matter development up top. And here's a case for dry eject only. And I don't have a lot of data on this, but to me the same idea applies as the deep tining. We aren't affecting enough of that surface area to just do dry eject only. So we look at 2 green here, the top 2 inches in 2012, 2013, organics at 1.8, 2.2, 2, 2.6. You can see that progression. We're just heading in the wrong direction. So time to get the conventional aerifiers out, work a little more sand and disrupt that surface. I love the amount of sand that you can work in with the dry eject and push that down below, especially in a soil-based system. It's a great way to work sand in. But I don't think it's the only way you can go as far as controlling the tops. I think you gotta still stick with the conventional. So, and to kind of go into this a little bit more, my thought is, especially if any of you have sand-based greens, say they start out at a 0.5% or a percent organic matter in the mix, and then I showed you all the numbers, how good that organic matter number can be maintained up top. It's 2%. So we go from 1% to 2%. It's perched. We've got a perched water table. There's a lot more capillary pore space up here than there is down here. So in that case, and I've seen it time and time again, it seems like the bentgrass in that situation struggles. The first few years is great. And then you get to that point where that layer gets about 1 inch, maybe just a little bit more, and the bentgrass isn't quite as happy. That perched water table, especially you get into a period where it's tenth of an inch of rain, and it never really dries out up here. That bent grass doesn't do very well. Roots go from 12 inches deep during the first couple of years, now they're all of a sudden 3 inches deep. So anything we can do to shove some of that organic matter that's up here into the original root zone, I think you're that much better off. The sooner we get that layer to 4 inches deep, we're still perking at 10 plus inches an hour. I mean, that's more than enough. But the solid tining, if we shove that down in below here, it's just going to get us to that point that much quicker. So in my eyes, on sand-based systems, I'm especially where you don't have a lot of organic in the original root zone, I'm all for the solid tining, pushing that down in. So here's kind of to prove that point a little bit. The mix starts at 0.6% organic matter, and these are the top inch samples every year. 0.6, 1, 1.4, 1.7, 2.4, and getting very aggressive, got it back down to 1.8 over a year span. That's about as good as it can be maintained at, that 1.8, 1.7. 2.4 got a little bit away, but they got aggressive and got back after it. So that's how that green's going to age and progress. One thing you can do to maybe help alleviate that a little bit is in the mix, if you throw a little more silt or clay, dirty it up a little bit, and I like to see a minimum of 1% organic matter in the mix, just because I know we're going to go to this in the next 5 years. So the more you can make that consistent with what you're going to be, the happier that bent grass is going to be. You're not going to have that perched water table up top. So, and this is an extreme case. I would hate to have been the shaper on this green when it was built. Would you build anything out of this, Mike? Yeah, that's a lot of clay and silt and not much sand. So when that green was built right there, boy, that would have been tough to shape. But again, same idea. You pull a core, bring that up and mix it with your sand, good luck. I mean, that's just delaying the benefits completely. And yeah, you're going to end up sand layer, soil layer, sand layer, soil layer. It's going to be a mess. And to kind of show that to another extent here, I've got two different profiles. This one's of a green that's not a lot of sand incorporated, but you can see there's, I think I counted them at one time, there were at least 13 layers in there. Core aerified, not a lot of sand worked in. I'm sure, and pretty heavy soil underneath again there on that green. This is actually a fairway, and I kind of wanted to put that up there to show a point to a different scale. It's a little bit easier to see than on a green. So they started top dressing the fairways, and we're still core aerifying. And how well are you going to remove some soil on fairways? Not very well. And it's sand layer, soil, sand, and then a little bit of organic buildup. When it's wet, it was black layer, black layer, black layer in each one of those sand profiles. So if you think about it in the same situation on a smaller scale in a green, if you're pulling a core, especially a soil-based green, that's the same thing that you're doing there. And I know in most cases, if you start top dressing fairways, you usually stop core aerifying, at least until you reach a depth that you're not pulling out any more soil, just to avoid that there. All right, everybody still with me? I think we're almost done here. So again, the reasons, and these have come up at some of the talks that I've done, I've added to the list. If you guys have any other thoughts or ideas, more sand incorporated in solid tining versus coring. And it's pretty much across the board, minimum 25% more sand than if they were coring, and I've heard all the way up to 50% more sand. I had one superintendent who tried it this fall, and he sent me a pretty colorful email. I'll leave out the expletives, but 150 plus tons of sand is what he incorporated this fall from his aeration. Large greens, but still, he went through a lot of sand. Quicker recovery time. I mean, if any of you have solid tined, you know the recovery time versus coring. I mean, you're talking maybe 5 days, 4 days. Yeah, recovery time's huge. They're ready to play again in no time. Less labor, obviously. Firm surface. You're not driving a top dresser over a green or a surface that has a bunch of holes out there. So yeah, that surface is nice and firm when you're done. And then, like I said, with sand-based greens, you're pushing some of that organic matter down below. Silt and clay, not getting mixed with your good top dressing sand. I mean, you're paying good money for that sand. Let's not delay the benefits of it. Reduced POA, that's the one that I want to really see if that will hold up. I don't know, but I got to think if we're not pulling a core, especially in a soil-based system, not pulling any soil up, there's got to be less seed brought to the surface. I think they did some studies at MSU, right, Kevin, where they took different depths of a green to see how much would germinate for POA, and it was down 3 inches and it was still germinating in some of those plugs. That was at Barton? Okay. Yeah, put them in the growth chamber. Yeah, so I don't know. It's a theory. We'll see if it holds up. But reasons to core aerify. And like I said, I was skeptical of this. I was very hesitant of recommending solid tine only. But coring, if that root zone is great, if you like where your conditions are, pull it up, work it back in, top it off with a little bit of sand after you blow the tufts off. No issues with that. So, and real briefly, one part of the equation of all this is the sand. It's got to be good sand. There's a lot of different options out there. You want your particle sizes right, you want your shape right, your source. I know price is in that as well, but I mean 150 tons a year roughly, 50 each time you aerify, another 50 when you're top dressing through the year. I mean if it's a $5 difference, that's $600. So I mean if you have to pay $5 more for good sand versus marginal sand, I'd pay it. That's money well spent. You're building a sand-based green on top of these soil greens a lot of times. So yeah, I think I've zoomed that in. So some of the rough numbers that I see some of the best conditions with as far as the particle size distribution. And fortunately in the state, you've got a lot of good options. You've got Osborne HP, you've got Tri-Turf 14, you've got, I believe Sand Sales is number 30. They all fall within those numbers there. A little bit of, on the very coarse, a little bit of coarse, a good amount of coarse actually. Mostly on the medium and kind of limited on the fines and the very fines. Spread that out. You don't want them all bunched up and real uniform. Otherwise you're not going to get that stability and that firmness that you want. So, and we'll summarize it here. So utilize the information. If you're leery of this or if you've done this, use the data. I mean, if you get questions why you need to aerify, I mean, how can they argue with the science? I know they can still argue, but give them some numbers. So, and my only commercial plug of the, I guess, presentation, test, don't guess. I mean, if you're going to start this process, find out where you start at, and then just track it each year. If you're worried about it, most of the physical testing, some courses, they ask me to do it every year. Others, we find the numbers don't change that quick. It's every 2 to 3 years. Just keep an eye on it. Just like going to the doctor for a physical, it's good to know where you stand. All right, so do you have a Sparty in your green? A nice physical specimen, or is it a mangy Wolverine? And I don't know what bet that was, but somebody got a haircut. So that's it. I'll take questions if we have time for a few or if there are any. Mike, sorry.
So it's really interesting for me. I don't do this every day like everybody else in the room, but we're always seeing more and more areas that are top dressers, that's fairways, approaches, tees, not just greens, line, all that technology. There's other areas of the golf course. One of the things that I see when things are aggressively done on the green and not necessarily to the surrounding areas, you start to get that top dress ring, things which affects the playability and maybe drainage and other stuff. So it seems to me this is a good way of being able to incorporate material outside of that, and then keep the solid time going, just from the simpler process and all that. Are you seeing some guys do that also? Or are they just still strictly doing it with greens and aprons and stuff?
I would say, are they incorporating the solid tining beyond just the putting surface? And without a doubt, yes. They've expanded because they are saving some money in labor. They're not cleaning up cores. They've got a little more dollars for the sand. They're expanding what they can cover, without a doubt. And I know and that's thinking long-term too. I'm just trying to think 10 years down the road, now that one course is already at 12 years, what happens when we're at 15 inches of sand build up there? That's a lot of sand. But you figure 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch a year, every 4 years you're putting an inch on, it's gonna happen. And architecturally, I mean, that's not my ball game. Something's probably gonna have to change, because like you said, the surrounds, the fall offs, I mean, they're gonna get a little more drastic and steep. So yeah, good question. Ron?
Brian, some of those earlier slides you showed the silt levels kind of bouncing around. I mean, what's your theory for that? Was it change in top dressing, or I also noticed when they did a deep tine or they buried depth, it seemed like they also kind of bounced, silt kind of bounced and then was reused.
Yeah, in a soil-based green, it seems like those silt numbers jump around a little bit depending on what, especially if they're core aerifying still. You'll hit some hot spots, things like that. But the one thing to remember with silt, it's a particle size. So it could have been, you had a lot of organic matter there and it's decomposing. Now it's smaller, it's become silt sized. So if you're making things healthier, getting more oxygen in there, keeping things drier, it may be some of that organic matter breaking down and becoming silt as well. Yeah, good question. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you.